Booktube. I'm here today reviewing The Lie by Chad Kultgen. And so, let's do this. This is the second book that Chad Kultgen wrote, but it's the first one that I read, so I feel like I should review this one first before the other ones. I'm going to start off by saying that for the first, 3/4 of the book, I want to say, because the way this is divided, it takes place over 3 students is like their college experience, so all 3 years. We start out with their freshman year, and we see them all the way to the summer after their senior year. So that's the time span. So I think up until the summer, actually including the summer before senior year, I really enjoyed reading this book. I think that halfway through the senior year part of the book, everything sort of falls apart, and I'm going to tell you why now, but that's pretty much the spoiler-free review for the majority of the book. It's really good, it's really engaging, if you do not want to read copious amounts of sex, do not pick up The Lie. Do not pick up anything by Chad Kultgen. The average American marriage might be different, but The Lie, the average American male, men, women, and children, copious amounts of sex. So, if you don't want to read it, do not pick this up. That being said, the first, like I said before, up until midway through senior year, this book is pretty great. It's captivating, it's engaging. After that, it falls apart, kind of fails. So, now I'm going to move on to the spoiler part of the discussion. So if you don't want to be spoiled, leave. If you're still here, you don't mind the spoilers. Okay. Let's start off with the characters. We have Kyle, Brett, and Heather. So Kyle is sort of like, he's very studious. He's kind of like the nerd, I guess, if you want to say. I don't really know how to define the nerdiness, but he was just the nerd. And he's best friends with the other character, Brett. And Brett comes from a really wealthy family, and Brett and Kyle have been friends since like 3rd grade, I think it was, because Kyle went to the private school on a scholarship, and so he was like all down to earth and normal, and the rest of the guys at the private school were just trying to be friends with Brett because they wanted to work for Brett's father's company, and not they wanted to because they're in the 3rd grade, but their dads worked for Brett's father, and so they were kind of friends because they had to be friends, but Kyle was different, so they bonded. And so they go to college in Texas. So they live in Texas because they talk about Dallas. So it takes place in Texas. So if you're a Texan, I don't know if you like it, but it takes place in Texas. And then Heather is a girl that Kyle meets on his first day at college because she's passed out outside his dorm room and she's drunk. And so then she just like takes over his bed and he falls in love with her. And for the most part, The Lie is pretty much, it's sort of a love story between Kyle and Heather, even though Kyle can see that Heather isn't, well, in retrospect, because the whole story is sort of told from like a retrospective point of view, which is what really drew me in at first, because even though a lot of the time books are written in 3rd person, they don't really feel like retrospective. It still feels like, we know it's in the past, but it doesn't, I don't really know how quite to describe this, because I feel like I'm sounding like an idiot, but in The Lie, the chapters are broken up by the characters. So we have Brett chapters, and Kyle chapters, and Heather chapters, and they rotate. So everyone has the same number of chapters. And so everything in the book seems really retrospective, and it's not like, I don't really know how else to describe it other than everything is retrospective. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the book, and that's what really drew me in the beginning. So, in retrospect, Kyle can see that Heather was just not for him, and I think it's during their junior year that their sophomore year, they break up. And I was really happy, because Kyle and Heather did not really have a healthy relationship, in my opinion, and Kyle's friend, Brett, was probably the single most misogynistic character I've ever read, and every girl to him was a whore and a slut, every one of them, but Heather more so than others, and so he wasn't really supportive of it either, and even though Brett and I weren't supportive of the relationship for the same reasons, he was just as happy when they broke up as I was, and so me and Brett got to, like, celebrate together, I guess, if you want to say that. So, I was happy when they broke up. But then, they get back together, and I think that's pretty much when everything falls apart. Because they break up because Heather really doesn't love Kyle in the beginning. She talks about how she's only with Kyle so she can get with Brett because Brett is, wealthy. And so their relationship wasn't really built on a strong foundation of, like, trust or love or anything other than, I want to sleep with your best friend. So when they broke up, it was all nice and happy. And then when they get back together, it's not like they get back together because Heather's like, oh, I was wrong before. She gets back together with him because she realized that she was dating a frat boy who was a douche, and she was upset because Kyle was happy with another girl, and so she just wanted him back because he could be happy with someone else. And Kyle, being the lovesick puppy he was, went back to her, and then he even proposed to her, but that wasn't good enough because it wasn't a good enough ring, and so she throws it at him, and she breaks up with him. And, life goes on pretty well for both of them after that. Kyle's understandably heartbroken about this, and eventually he does, I think, move on. But then we get to senior year, and everything falls apart. And I don't want to say what falls apart, even though this is a sort of spoilery discussion. I told you, they break up and get back together. But the things that Kyle does in senior year are so out of line with his character that I was left wondering if I was still reading the same novel that I started out reading. And then I even questioned if Chad even knew where he was going with the things that he was writing, because there was no indication that Kyle would do these things that he was doing, and it was very... I don't even know how to... It was appalling, almost, that this character was doing these things that he never would have considered before, or that I don't really know how it's like. This was not the character that I had read for like 300 pages before this, and so that was really disheartening. And so it left me wondering really if Chad had ever planned this out, because there was no indication that this behavior was something that could come from Kyle. And so then the subsequent events that happened, they didn't really make sense. Even though they made sense for the character that was doing them, they were only happening because they were in response to the thing that Kyle did, which made no sense to begin with. So that's why I'm left in a quandary of, like, I don't really know how to rate this book. I think on Goodreads I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because I really did enjoy this novel for the majority of the time that I spent reading it, but I don't know how much you can knock off because the ending made no sense. So, if you've read The Lie by Chad Kultgen, please leave comments down in the comment section below. We can have a nice discussion on The Lie, and if you haven't read it, feel free to still leave comments down in the comment section below, letting me know if you're interested in reading it, and if you do ever get around to reading it, let me know what you thought. So, that's all I have to say on the matter today. Until next time, guys, bye.